Allison from Learning at the Primary Pond. I'm a literacy specialist, and I'm going to do a mini training with you called What to Include in Your Small Group Reading Lesson Plans. I feel like this is the $1,000,000 question because when it comes to small groups, if you're a K-2 teacher, then you know how powerful those small group lesson plans can be. But at the same time, our time is so limited. So we really want to focus on exactly what matters the most. And we also want our small group lessons to reflect where kids are in their reading development. So that's what we're going to talk about today in this mini training. Now, I know that at the time that I'm doing this, a lot of us are coming up on the brand new school year. Maybe you're starting soon, maybe you're starting in a couple months. And after the couple of years that we've had, I think we're all on the same page that we know we want our kids to make pretty quick reading progress, right? Of course, there's lots of stuff we're going to focus on, social, emotional, all that good stuff, but we know that we want our kids to make quick literacy progress, quick progress in general. And so this training is kind of like a mini training, like I said, but then I'm actually doing some full 1-hour professional development trainings. They come with certificates, and I'm going to be doing those July 19th and July 20th, 2021. So that's a Monday and a Tuesday. And this is just a small piece of what we're going to cover. In the full trainings, I'm going to give you schedules. I'm going to kind of show you how the different pieces of your literacy block can fit together. So today we're going to focus on small groups, but I would also love to see you in those full-length trainings. You should be able to find the link in this post to attend those trainings. They're totally free. But let me know if you don't see them. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dive in. If you're here, I would love to know what grade you teach or are going to be teaching in the coming school year, just so that I can kind of have a sense of who is here. And then if you have specific questions, you can feel free to drop those in the chat as well. All right. So we all know that there are some challenges in planning small groups, right? So first and foremost, as I mentioned, our time is very limited. I would love to know in the chat as well, how long do you have per small group typically? So do you have 15 minutes? Do you have 10 minutes? Do you have 20 minutes? I'm just curious how long you have to spend with each group. Another challenge is that you may be trying to fit in a lot into your small groups. So you may have heard people talk about putting in phonological awareness, phonics or word work, reading and writing. So then maybe you're asking yourself, well, should I try to do it all? How much time to devote to each, right? All great questions. Hey, KJ in first grade, welcome. Liz, hey, in kindergarten. Lori, welcome. Natasha, Amanda. Okay, so Lori says, thanks for sharing, Lori. She has 20 to 25 minutes per small group, so that's actually pretty decent. KJ says 15 to 20. Liz says 20 minutes max. Natasha says 30 minutes each day. Okay, so you have a lot longer. Neat. And then the last challenge that I feel is a challenge for many teachers is just knowing what types of books and activities to use with different groups in order to really meet their needs, right? Small group is all about differentiation. And so we need to make sure that what we're doing in small groups and the texts that we're choosing for our kids really match their development as their brains learn to read, some of them for the first time. Okay, so I really broke down this little mini training into 3 steps. After the 3 steps, I'm going to show you some real lesson plans. So we're going to look at like an early kinder lesson plan example, like a little bit, like mid-late kinder lesson plan example, first grade, and then second grade. So we are going to look at real lesson plans, but first, when we're planning, I broke that process down into 3 different steps. And so step number 1 would just be to think about the big picture being your entire literacy block. So sometimes when I get asked the question, what should I put in my small group? As much as I wish I could give you a really straight, simple answer, the honest truth is that it just depends on what else you're doing during your day, right? Because small group doesn't live in a bubble. So you are probably, hopefully, having some type of whole group phonics lesson. Let me know in the chat if you teach phonics in a whole group setting. I know that some people will teach phonics like just in small group, which is great because it can be differentiated, but then at the same time you run into some challenges like, well, how do you make sure that kids get enough phonics instruction? So anyway, would love to know in the chat what your phonics setup is. But this is one piece of the puzzle to consider. So number one, what does your whole group instruction look like? Is differentiation happening there? If I have time, I love to teach some phonics small groups. So then if I have reading small groups, and again, this all kind of depends on the grade level, right? With kindergarten, I really merge reading and phonics small groups, and I don't feel like I need to have two separate, times in the day, but you could have some differentiation, some small group phonics instruction already happening. And so if that's the case, then yeah, you're going to be talking in your small group about the phonics patterns that you're learning, but you wouldn't need to spend quite as much time if you're already doing phonics instruction and you're already differentiating there. So the amount of time that you spend on word work is going to depend on what your whole group instruction looks like. So Natasha says both, Lori says both, Megan says whole group phonics mini lesson for 15 minutes. Yvette says, I do a quick whole group to introduce the skill and then do centers and phonics small groups. Yeah, so what your phonics and word work instruction looks like, again, just depends for your reading groups. Are you having separate phonics time? Are you not? Are you trying to get it both in? If you're trying to work on reading and phonics and that's your only time for phonics, then you're going to have to make sure that even though it's just happening in small groups, that you're still providing that explicit systematic instruction and that you have enough time for it. So phonics is one piece of the puzzle, right? Another thing that you might want to try to fit into small group is writing. However, you may have a separate writing block. I hope that you have a separate writing block. So my questions for you there are just, are students getting enough practice and differentiated support during your whole group writing block? Maybe they're even doing some sentence writing like dictation during phonics. So you may have a lot of really good writing stuff going on already. And if that's the case, I wouldn't feel pressured to try to include a lot of writing in small group. Now that doesn't mean that you can't include it, right? But again, we're thinking about not just small group, but what's happening in the big picture. So I want to think about our whole literacy block. And by the way, if you're just joining me in thinking about scheduling your whole literacy block, I've got some free online workshops coming up, and we are going to plan. I'm going to show you like literally a breakdown by minutes and what we're working on. I'm going to show you what your whole literacy block can look like. So look for the link in that post to sign up for the free training, because we're just doing small groups now. But that like complete training is going to cover a whole lot more. Okay, so step one again is just think about the big picture. Think about what else is happening in your literacy block, because that can help guide what you put in your small group. And it can take some of the pressure off, because if you're already doing some of that work in other parts of your literacy block or your school day, then you don't need to worry about it so much during small groups. So that can be really helpful. All right, so step two, when you're planning your small groups and trying to figure out what to put in, is to consider the development and needs of your groups. And so I've kind of broken down where your students may be with their reading into 3 categories. And this is a little bit oversimplified, right? Like, we know there's more than just like 3 stages that kids go through when they're learning to read. But for the purposes of this mini training, I think this will be helpful. So, first of all, we have our pre-readers, right? These kiddos are not yet reading traditionally. They may know some letter sounds. They're learning their letter sounds, potentially a few high frequency words. They probably really aren't at this stage though, blending to read words. So they're not yet reading CVCs. They're still learning their letter sounds. Let me know if you expect to have some pre-readers in your class this coming school year. All right, our second group, and this covers like a lot of stages, actually, a lot of different levels of kids, would be emergent readers. So these kiddos know their letter sounds and they're learning other phonics patterns. And the patterns that they're learning are really going to differ. So maybe they're working on digraphs, blends, long vowels, maybe something more complex. And these kiddos are still decoding many words sound by sound. So they're not just picking up a book and necessarily knowing all the words and reading it. There's still some decoding action going on. Let me know in the chat if you have some kids or you're expecting some kids that are going to be emergent readers, okay? So now let's talk about what this has to do with the brain. So In our brain, right, this is again a really oversimplification, but we have a part of our brain that's processing the visual. So like letters on the page, knowing that this is the letter C, right? And then we have part of our brain that's processing like the sounds in words. And so we're developing that process when we're doing phonological awareness work, right? Like we're having kids break sounds, cat, at, all that good stuff. So there's part of our brain that processes the sounds in words. And during the pre-reader and emergent reader, I would even say a little bit in the fluent reader stage, we are helping our kids develop a third part of the brain. And that third part of the brain is where our brain is taking the visual information, like this is the letter C, and the sounds information, and we are helping kids develop this area of the brain by putting those two things together. So this area of the brain is where kids are learning that the letter C can say k, can also say s, right? So in the pre-reading and emergent reading stage, a lot of our small group work, and I'll show you some concrete examples in a minute, is really working on developing that third area of the brain that I mentioned, where we're bringing the letters and the sounds together to make those connections. Now, when kids become fluent readers, many of those connections are already built, right? So they're decoding new words in chunks or even syllables. They're more fluent in their reading, and they have more brain space, quote unquote, again, very not technical, to focus on comprehension. So it's not that there's no tricky words whatsoever. It's not that their phonics learning is over. It's just that a lot of that work has already been done to help them bridge the visual and the sounds in words in that part of the brain that I was talking about developing. So the reason why I'm sharing these three groups, and again, this is an oversimplification, but the reason why I wanted to share these three developmental stages is because when we're thinking about planning our small group instruction, you could easily have some of each group, or at least two of each group, in your classroom. And so the stuff that you're doing with them, it's not just that you're choosing different levels of text for them, it's that you're also choosing different activities and choosing to spend different amounts of time on different things. Because like with the pre-reader and emergent reader stages, you're still developing that third area of the brain a lot more with bridging the letters and the sounds, okay? So let's see. Sherry says, expecting first graders in all three categories after this past school year. Yep. Pamela says pre-readers, emergent readers. Lori says pre and emergent. KJ, a lot of pre-readers and some higher kids doing a lot of differentiating. Yes, that will be a challenge for sure. I feel like this school year, more than ever, we're going to have a lot of kids that are on a big range of levels. Okay, so back to our three steps, right? I said first step was number one, to think about the big picture, consider what you're already doing in your literacy block. Step two was to consider the development and needs of each of your groups. And remember, you might have kids on very different levels that fit into this emergent category. Because you might have kids that they know all their letter sounds, but they're not even there with digraphs yet. You might also have kids that are learning complex long vowel spelling patterns. So it's like a big range of kids that can fit, especially into the emergent reader category. All right, so step three would be to plan activities and timing, meaning how long you're going to spend on each activity according to student needs. And so we're going to break this down, but then I think it will also be helpful because after this, I'm going to show you some example lesson plans. Okay, so with our pre-readers, hopefully this is big enough for you to read, but I'll read you everything on the grid. When it comes to the phonological awareness and phonics component of our lesson plans for small group, we want most of our small group lesson to be spent here. Because yes, we can do work with books, and I'll talk about what that might look like, but we are really starting with the basics. Fluency, comprehension, all of that comes, right? But if the kids can't lift the words off the page, then we're gonna have trouble with reading. So for that reason, we're spending a lot of time on letter sounds, a lot of time on phonological awareness, rhyming, but even, I would say even more importantly than writing, getting kids to blend the sounds in words. So if you say at, can they say mat? There's different ways to scaffold that too, right? And then they might not quite be there when it comes to segmenting words. So if you say mat, they would say at. But maybe you can do it for them and they can repeat it, But regardless, again, we're gonna look at examples. A lot of our small group lesson time is spent here. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't use books with them. And again, we're just talking about small group. We're doing lots of great read alouds, but that's happening outside of small group, typically. So with these kiddos, I may use an alphabet book or a 1-word per page book, and I'll show you an example of that. But the purpose here is not for them to be decoding, right? Because they actually cannot decode yet. When I'm using books with them, it provides opportunities for comprehension and language work, but we're really developing print concepts. And when I say print concepts, tell me what that means to you in the chat, but to me, that means, knowing how to point once under each word, knowing how to count the letters in a word, knowing, hey, when I say this is the first letter in the word, this literally in the word is the first letter. So really basic stuff like that. And the reason why I feel it's important to start developing this, even though they can't decode yet, is because learning to read is kind of like learning to drive a car. So if you think back to when you were first learning to drive a car, I don't know about you, but there was a lot going on for me, right? Like you had to think about okay, the mirrors and when can you turn on red, right? What the lanes, staying in the lanes, changing lanes. There's just so many things that you're thinking about. And that's basically what's happening to kids when they're learning to read. And so when we get them to this stage where they really are decoding, like here, we want them to already have some of the basics down so that more of their brain space is freed up. And so Kelly, great, she says reading left to right, top to bottom, directionality, counting words, one-to-one correspondence, yes. So during the pre-reading stage, we don't have to master 100% all of it, but the more print concepts that they do master, the easier it is for them to focus on decoding when they actually get to that phase that they are decoding. So these print concepts can be really important. So here's how I do it with my pre-readers. Because they can't read books yet, and I'll show you an example, I actually read aloud the text to them. And so their job is just maybe to echo read or whatever, read what after I read, to point, and then we talk about print concepts. And again, I'll show you what that can look like in a minute. And then the book, which doesn't actually take very long, right? Because I'm the one reading it to them. This is like a jumping point, right? Jumping off point. We can discuss the text, build background knowledge, oral language practice. Because yes, part of reading is learning the letter sounds and being able to decode the words, but part of it is also comprehension, okay? And when it comes to comprehension, reading comprehension is basically the same as listening comprehension, because when we're reading, we have that reading voice in our heads, so we're listening to ourselves read. So we also have to be working on strengthening comprehension skills, but at the pre-reader stage, all that looks like is, listening comprehension. So the kids are listening to the text, they are discussing it with you, they're learning new words. So yes, this stuff is important, and I typically do spend a lot of my lesson here, but there's also got to be some language development going on, because when the kids can read for themselves, we want those language skills to be strong so that they can also comprehend. Of course, this is not the only time in the day that comprehension and language work is going on, right? We have read alouds, we have maybe other oral language work throughout the day, okay? But this is what it can look like in a small group instruction. Okay, so again, we will look at some example lesson plans, but now I want to move on to emergent readers. And again, those are those kiddos who they know their letter sounds and they may fall into a range of categories. So maybe they're just learning digraph, maybe they're learning long vowels. Lots of levels fall into this one category, but basically they're still decoding many words sound by sound. So when it comes to phonics and phonological awareness work with these kiddos, you want to review or teach phonics skills based on the group's needs. And again, this phonics piece is going to depend on what your whole literacy block as a whole looks like, which is what I mentioned earlier. So it may be something quick if you've got a whole lot of other phonics instruction going on, but it may be more in depth if this is your main time to teach phonics. With this group, we're again building that area of the brain that I mentioned, where we're getting kids to, merge their knowledge of the visual, like this is the letter C, and the knowledge of the sound. So we're still developing that part of the brain. So phonics and phonological awareness work is a big key for them, okay? We're still continuing to develop that phonological awareness. And then when it comes to text choice, because kids are still solidifying their phonics knowledge, and again, that area of the brain, we want to choose text with a high level of decodability, meaning that the kids can decode, use their phonics knowledge, many of the words in the text. Do they have to be able to decode all of them? No. And I'll show you why not and how you can help make a text a little more decodable for your kids when we look at the example lesson plans. But we want text with a high level of decodability so that they can take that phonics knowledge that they're learning and really apply it. Again, with comprehension and language, pretty much the same thing as your pre-readers. We still want to discuss the text, build background knowledge, and oral language practice. Now, last but not least, before we go into our example lesson plans, we've got our fluent readers. Now, they're not done with their phonics knowledge necessarily, right? We're getting them to continue working on applying phonics knowledge. So it might be more complex here, right? Like diphthongs and multisyllabic words and, rule breakers and things like that, but they're still learning to apply their phonics knowledge. We often practice breaking up multisyllabic words at this stage because that can be where kids get tripped up. And then we want to be choosing text that kids can decode with about 95% accuracy or above, and that they have decent comprehension with. Again, we're discussing the text. I feel like you can't see this box. It pretty much says the same as the above two, but then I also mentioned down here, strengthen our comprehension strategy use. With fluent readers, more of their attention is freed up to focus on comprehension, right? Because that area of the brain that I keep talking about is a bit stronger, visual and sounds, right? They know their phonics a little bit better. So that means that we can ask them to do things like, monitor their comprehension a little bit more, apply some comprehension strategies because they have more space for it. Again, it doesn't mean that we're not working on comprehension with these guys. It's just that we can ask them to do a little bit more because, coming back to that metaphor of driving the car, they've now mastered different pieces of the puzzle so that they just have a little more brain space to think about it. Because if you think about you driving a car now, you're not necessarily thinking about all those little things. It comes more automatically. And that's what's happening for these fluent readers as well. The reading process is becoming a little more automatic. Okay. If you're just joining us, by the way, would love to know what grade you're teaching this year. Always helpful to know who is joining us and what the levels of their kids are. All right, so now, as I mentioned, we're going to quickly go through some lesson examples for all of these categories. I actually have 4, and again, we're just going to go through them pretty quickly. The full length training, the links for that is in the link for that should be in this post, so you can sign up for it. But pretty quickly, let's go through a pre-reader lesson example, early emergent, and then fluent reader. All the materials that you're seeing here come from either my kindergarten literacy club or my 1st and 2nd grade literacy club. We are opening up the clubs to accept new members next week. They're open for new members July 19th through 27th. So would love to have you in the clubs, but I'll have more information coming about that later on. Okay, so pre-reader lesson example. Different ways to teach this, right? Here is just one example. And then, of course, not all of your lessons would be exactly like this. All right, so these are for those kiddos that don't know all their letter sounds yet. So I still do like to start with a book. Again, most of the lesson is phonics and phonological awareness, but we'll start with the book. I'll introduce the text topic. So like for this one from the Kindergarten Literacy Club, the topic was just school lunch, which is really meaningful for kids at the beginning of the year. Maybe they're bringing a lunch or getting a lunch for the first time. So I engage them in discussion. We work on developing oral language, vocabulary related to school lunch. Next up, I pass out the books, and I'm going to remind them to point under each word. However, they're not actually reading the text, okay? They cannot decode yet. So you can use an alphabet book, you use something like this with just one word on the page. I read the words aloud to them, so I might say milk, and then their job is to read and point milk. They are not asked to decode yet, again, because they are not able to decode yet. They don't know all of their letter sounds and they can't yet blend. So after we go through the text, which is pretty quick, I'll have the kids retell, what was in the kids' school lunch. We'll discuss the content of the text for comprehension. Again, a great way for us to develop language. Next up, and this is one reason why the book is really valuable, is we will discuss a print concept. So maybe our focus concept is just identifying the first letter in the word. Oh, let's find the M in milk. Let's find the first letter in pizza, P. Let's find the first letter in corn, C, right? So we will focus on one thing. Again, it could be, any one of print concept skills that we've talked about. Could be counting the letters, concept of letter versus word, any of that. And then we also can practice recognizing letters in context. So I might say, oh, hey, did you notice that pizza starts with the letter P? What sound does that make? P, right? So we're trying to bridge that phonics instruction that's going on at a different time than the small group instruction with, actual books and words on the page. Then the rest of our lesson, and again, this is actually the majority of it. It looks like fewer steps, but this is pretty quick because, again, you are reading the text to the kids. The majority of the lesson is phonics and phonological awareness work. I just have some examples, and again, this is really going to vary. Oh, super, I see some kindergarten teachers. This is perfect for you. Shannon, first grade, awesome. So in this particular lesson from the Kindergarten Literacy Club, we were having the kids play the same sound game. So you say 2 words. They might be related to school lunch. And if they start with the same sound, the kids do thumbs up. And if they don't, they do thumbs down. Okay, so that's one thing you could do. Another thing you can do, if you see these little pictures we have here, those are also from the Kindergarten Literacy Club lesson plan. You can show them a picture. They can say the first sound in the picture. You could also take it a step further if they're able to and actually write the letter for the first sound in the word. Last but not least, and you may or may not do all of this. You maybe do 2 of these activities depending on how your time goes. You're going to have the kids practice writing some sounds. So maybe you tell them a sound and they write the letter that represents that sound. Or you could even do some CVC words. And that might sound strange because I just said that with your pre-readers, they don't know all their letter sounds. However, what I found is that the earlier I start getting them to practice writing CVC words, the better it goes later on. And so what this is going to look like, I'm not going to say, okay, write the word hat. That's not what's going to happen. What I'm going to say is, okay, we're going to write the word hat. Say hat. They say hat, okay? Now I'm going to say, I want you to listen to me break up the sounds in hat. At. Now you do it with me. At. Good job. Okay, the first sound in hat is, they might know, they might not. Okay, write the letter that says, you might even have to tell them that's the letter H, right? You can vary the amount of support that you're providing, and you can make it doable for them to write CVC words, or even just one CVC word, okay? Pre-readers vary because you could have pre-readers that know 0 letters, and you could have pre-readers that know 20 letters, but they're just not decoding yet. So the stuff that you're doing with them, the majority of the lesson, phonics and phonological awareness, what that looks like is going to be depending upon their needs. And with something like writing CVC words, you provide the amount of support that they need. Okay, now let's move on to an early emergent reader lesson example. Again, these materials are from my Kindergarten Literacy Club, this book example, and the lesson, our members get a full lesson. So it looks different than this, but this is just kind of the Cliff Notes version. Okay, so with these kiddos, they know most of their letter sounds and they are decoding. So early emergent, maybe they don't know digraphs and long vowels yet, but they are doing some decoding. So just like with our pre-little guys, we're gonna introduce the text topic and engage kids in discussion. So with the KLC, they get, our members get 3 fiction, 3 nonfiction books. So you can see that this topic is actually related to this one, and that's intentional. But anyway, so we're going to talk about the topic with kids, try to get that oral language going. And then next up, you can pre-teach any necessary words. So we are looking for decodability. Remember, I said with these little ones, we want text with a high level of decodability so that they can apply their phonics knowledge to the text. That doesn't mean that they have to be able to decode every single word in the text. You can pre-teach any necessary words. If blending is still hard, you can blend as a group a couple of words from the book before they actually read it. So you can provide support with that. Now, you don't want to take away all of the work of the book, right? You want them to have to do some blending and reading, blending to read. However, you can provide support so that the text becomes manageable for them. So the kids are going to read the text. Again, I said a high level decodability. Now, not all texts need to look like this. This is just the Kindergarten Literacy Club example for July. We use the little rebus pictures so that we could have like a rich topic and rich conversation. But these kids aren't able to decode a ton of CVC words yet. If we gave them at this level tons and tons of CVC words, this imaginary group of kids, right, that would be too much for them. So some of the work is done for them here, so they don't even have to read. They just know the sandwich is in the box. So they're focused on reading the words the, is, in, box is decodable, right? We can provide support if we need that, but we're trying to get them to practice, apply that phonics knowledge as much as possible. So that's why I want a high level of decodability. After the kids read, they're going to retell, we're going to discuss the content of the text, some comprehension, asking them some questions. In the full Kindergarten Literacy Club lesson plan, we give you questions to discuss with them. Excuse me. Next up, we're going to discuss some tricky words. These may be words that the kids struggled with in the text. And here is where we're getting them to discuss phonics in context. In context phonics practice is really key. We want kids not only to learn the letters and the sounds and the patterns, but we also want them to apply it to their actual reading. And so because we're using a text with a high level decodability, we're talking about, hey, we've talked about this sound. We talked about blending to read CVC words. We're getting them to apply that. And some of it you might want to do before you read, but you're probably going to want to revisit after you read, especially if there were some words that were tricky. Now with word work, this is still an important part of it. And again, it's really going to depend on the needs of your students. It could be phoneme segmenting or manipulation. Manipulation meaning like pretty basic stuff at this level. It could be like switching the first sound. So, okay, say mat, now change t, s. What word do you get? Sat, stuff like that. Writing sounds, we talked about writing CVC words in the previous lesson example. And so you would just provide less and less support as the kids are ready for it. So you might do some of the same activities with different groups, but you provide different levels of support. Okay, next up, lesson example that shouldn't say number 2. Oh no, it is number 2 because we did like an early emergent and then now we're doing an emergent lesson example. And these materials are from our 1st and 2nd grade literacy club. So again, we're still pulling from this category of kiddos that are emergent readers, but their skills are a little bit higher here. They can read more words more easily. Maybe they're, learning to read words with plurals. It's just a little more challenging. So just like before, we're going to introduce the text topic, engage kids in discussion. And again, this part is key because you can take a text with a few words that kids may not be able to decode, and you can make the text more decodable for them by pre-teaching those words. So if you see here, it's really small, but on our 1st and 2nd grade literacy club passages, we actually have suggested words for you to pre-teach. You may also want to model blending to read words as needed. Then the kids read the text. Again, we retell, ask some comprehension questions, and again, we're applying that phonics knowledge in context, and that can actually integrate with word work. So with this, the full complete lesson plan from the 1st and 2nd grade literacy club, the kids were turning CVC words into plurals by adding S. Well, there's actually examples in this text of CVC words with S plural. So lots, right? Kids. So we can tie the word work into the text, right, by having them find examples of plurals in the text, kids, lots, other things. And then maybe they add some more. Maybe they're working with magnetic letters. Maybe they're working on whiteboards. They're turning other CVC words into plurals. Okay, so those are some word work options. All right, our last lesson plan, and I know it jumps a lot, right? Like there's stuff that happens between here and here, right? They're working on long vowel patterns. There's other stuff, but I was trying to do a mini training. No, we're going kind of long. But just for the sake of this, mini training, let's jump ahead to here when the kids are a bit more fluent and they're actually reading a larger chunk of text. So again, going to introduce the text topic, engage kids in discussion, work on that oral language. You can still pre-teach any necessary words, okay? So your kids, what words may be a little bit tricky for them. So like, again, with the 1st and 2nd grade literacy club passages, you have some words that are suggested to pre-teach that may be challenging for them just based upon the phonics patterns. You may also want to take one or two multisyllabic words from the text and practice breaking them up together. I have instructions on my blog, learningattheprimarypond.com, if you need help learning how to teach kids to break up words into syllables. But at this fluent level, there's not a ton of multisyllabic words in this particular passage, but as they get higher and higher, there are going to be those words. And so you can help make the text more doable for them by pulling out a couple of the words and working on them beforehand. Next up, of course, the kids read the text. It may also be that they read part of the text. Especially with nonfiction, there's so many ideas that go into one single text. Like when I was reading this text or a version of it with one of my little ones, we actually broke it in half because I wanted her to talk to me about what the first part of the text was about. And I noticed that there were some things that she missed. So even if they could just decode and be fine, it may be helpful to break the text in half. You see that our passages are numbered. So you can say, okay, just read up through paragraph 3 and then stop, and then do a little bit of comprehension work before the kids move on. Just a little side note there. Kids retell, we're asking comprehension strategies. Again, we're still breaking up some tricky words as a group. Maybe these words are things that the kids struggled with, or I noticed that they misread while they were reading. Again, multisyllabic words is a big one to hit. And then these are just 2 word work examples that come directly from the actual full lesson plan. So in this lesson, you could choose between having the kids build words with the vowel team or reviewing the CK ending rule and writing CK words. So we're still doing word work, but more of the time is devoted to the kids actually reading the text. Okay, so last but not least, you might be wondering, what about writing? So as we talked about earlier, I really recommend maintaining a separate writing block. So a lot of your writing instruction is happening then. That said, you can do something like a sentence dictation in your small group. A sentence dictation would just be where you make up a sentence, and the sentence should only have high frequency words that the kids know and words that the kids can spell using their phonics knowledge. So if you have kids that only can read CVC words, you wouldn't throw words into the dictation that have like silent E or long vowel teams, right? You're really intentionally choosing that sentence for them to write. So you can do some of that in small groups. You can do some of that during your separate phonics lesson. Just depends on your block as a whole. Now, as they are ready, you might have students write about the small group text as follow-up independent work. So these are from the 1st and 2nd grade literacy club materials for July. What are 3 ways that kids can go to school? So they read this in small group and then they do this independently. And then maybe they're doing something like this, comparing schools. So this one has a diagram, my school and school in Japan. So they're comparing and contrasting. So even if you can't fit a ton of writing into your small group, as the kids get older and more confident with their writing, they may be able to go off and write about the small group text, even though it's not happening in your small group time. Or you can start it with them and then they finish independently. All right, well, I hope that this was helpful. I also hope to see you on my brand new free webinars. So like I said, it did go longer than I intended, but this was kind of a mini PD, and we're gonna talk in these full webinars, which you get a certificate for clock hours for. We're gonna talk about how to really build your literacy block from the ground up at the beginning of the school year. This was one piece of the puzzle. In these webinars, we're actually going to get really specific, like kindergarten. We're going to talk, there's a separate session for kindergarten, and in that, we're going to talk about like how do you get them at the beginning of the year to the point where you have the schedule that you want to have. We're going to talk about what exactly that schedule can look like. How do you build those procedures and routines so that you're focusing on the most important literacy skills? So in these free webinars, it's not just small group, we're talking about much more than that. And I'm going to give you example schedules. In the 1st and 2nd grade webinar, we have kids who, at the time that I'm recording this, we have kids that had some interruptions in their learning these past couple of years. And so we might have students that are coming in on a big variety of levels, and maybe we're feeling pressured to help them quote unquote catch up. We always want our kids to make quick literacy progress, right? So regardless of all that stuff, we want to focus on the skills that really matter most. And so in the first and second grade version, it'll be a little bit different from the kindergarten version, very specific to those grade levels. We're going to talk about how to build your schedule around the skills that matter most to help them make fast literacy progress. So very excited about these webinars. These are things that I do, so I'm only doing them July 19th or July 20th, and that's it. Again, there's separate kindergarten, first and second grade sessions. You get a certificate for 1 hour. We're doing a giveaway. If you noticed, I had a lot of materials from my first and second grade literacy club, as well as my kindergarten literacy club. I'm actually going to be, so we're opening the clubs next week, July 19th, and we're going to be giving away some memberships at the very end of the webinar. So not only could you end up with this full PD with a certificate, but you could also potentially get a membership to the literacy clubs. And if you haven't heard of literacy clubs, those are groups where I support kindergarten and then first and second grade teachers with their literacy instruction throughout the school year. And every single month they get brand new materials so that you aren't kind of totally cast out at sea trying to come up with your own small group lesson plans. You get small group lesson plans and you get independent work for your kids as a member of the clubs. So super excited. Next week is going to be huge. I do hope to see you on these workshops. If you can't find the link, it should be listed here, but please let me know in a comment. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them. Even if you're watching this later, I'm happy to come back and answer them. I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and I really hope to see you on these webinars next week. Bye, everybody.